Let the words of my lips and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O God, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. This morning, after many weeks reading the Gospel of John, we just heard a gospel story from the book of Luke, where we encounter a truly unbelievable transformation. Luke's gospel as a whole shows us that nothing is impossible with God, and this message is demonstrated provocatively today with the healing of the Gerasene demoniac. In today's story, we are confronted with a man who has no name, no home, and who has been completely ostracized, if not forgotten, by his community. The story tells us he is called Legion, which is not so much a name as it is a military term. In Rome at that time, legion was a unit of measure and was equivalent to approximately 6,000 Roman soldiers. The use of this word is meant to give us, the readers and listeners, a sense of the sheer magnitude of that which is disturbing this man who is living among the dead. We hear the man is naked, so overcome by violent impulses, he cannot be restrained, even with chains and shackles. He's excluded from the city and living among the tombs of a graveyard. Despite all of this, when he sees Jesus, he recognizes him immediately and demands from Jesus to know why Jesus is there. What does Jesus, the Son of the Most High God, have to do with me, he asks. And then this man begs Jesus not to torture him. Of course, Jesus does not torture the man, but he talks with him. And after learning what constricts him, Jesus has a conversation with the demons. And in the end, Jesus gives the legion of demons permission to leave the man and enter a herd of swine, causing the pigs to rush down the hill and drown in a lake. This part of the story, amongst other parts, feels violent. The demons are rehomed in unassuming livestock, and the livestock is killed in a way that seems somewhat cruel. But this was the extraordinary measure the story tells us that Jesus takes to save. The lesson here might be that nothing is too extraordinary for God when God is fighting for and with us. God is about our freedom from all things and in all things. And God sets this man free. And what else could this story be saying to us this morning? First, I want to pause for a moment here to acknowledge the nuanced topic of demons and the various ways they are addressed in popular culture and other sermons. We cannot know for sure what the gospel writers were referring to when they talked about demons in gospel stories. We do know, of course, that they didn't have the language we do now to talk about mental health, neurodivergence, or trauma, or how we must care for one another in a trauma-informed way. Often, stories of healing in the Bible, especially from demons, are interpreted by focusing on personal affliction and topics of mental health. These different interpretations could be the topic of an entire preaching series. What I want to say this morning, however, is that when I read this gospel story, I was thinking and continue to think about these demons not as an individual situation of a person, but rather as social, collective ailments or ills that separate a person or a group of people from being fully integrated into community. To me, when reading this story, the demons are the things that are keeping us from building beloved community. The things that are keeping us from experiencing God's love fully in this world. And much like the man in the story this morning, there are so many injustices, So many demons in this world today that are keeping us from being able to live out God's dream for us. Like the man in the story, we too might feel like we are living among the tombs or walking among the dead. We're living in a world full of dead ideals, dead hopes, still grappling and mourning with our beloved dead, who we miss so much. The list of demons that torture us today, racism, sexism, homophobia, individualism, mass incarceration, violence of any kind, this list is legion. That is, it is very long. But God's dream is not for us to live in a world with these pervasive injustices. God's dream is not for us to live with death-dealing in our politics, in our faith, our society, death-dealing that feels overwhelming. The plague of gun violence alone is so overwhelming, and it affects each of us in different ways, this week specifically affecting a parish in our own Episcopal Church. And there are some people in our world, perhaps, for whom change from the current death-dealing system is scary. They're clinging so tightly to power that they fear it being taken from them. This is similar to the people in the gospel story who were afraid when they saw the change in the man, this man that they had so long cast off and marginalized. They heard rumors of the miracle Jesus had performed, and when they went to see the man, they encountered him clothed and sitting at Jesus' feet, a place of discipleship. He was totally transformed, and they were so afraid that they asked Jesus to leave them. I imagine at that moment they realized they could no longer control the situation. They had a deal before Jesus came along, and that system worked out well for them. They marginalized a man, and that meant they could keep their best interests in mind and keep power. And I can think of some people for whom the thought of losing power right now or money scares them so deeply, they're going to keep our country chained with their ideas and policies and rhetoric. And two, I think that there's some fear in all of us. This fear shows up differently, however, but I think it's there. After so many atrocities, acts of violence, and news cycle after news cycle with the same images and headlines, and still no substantial change, I fear we will never experience change. No policy change or gun reform, and I'm finding myself fearing that these things might never happen. I think the townspeople in the gospel today felt this sort of fear too. They had given up hope on the man with demons. They saw that it was not worth it to fight, so instead they cast him off and they shackled him. Yet this is precisely where Jesus shows up. Jesus shows up in the depth of evil and fear in this story and makes change for the man and for his community. In the gospel story today, Jesus takes on evil of an expansive nature. Not only is that which is affecting this man described as an army of demons of incredible power, but the man is in a graveyard and among swine, two things that in Jesus' world meant that the man was ritually impure. Yet Jesus doesn't hesitate. He goes there and he confronts the evil on its own turf. Doesn't blink an eye when the man approaches him, but asks for his name and offers the man healing, wholeness, and redemption. He opens a space for the beloved community to emerge, even after so long of separation. And for the community in this story, a different way of life, a new order, and a new reality has arrived. And these are the things that I hope for so deeply right now. I hope Jesus can show up and come and confront the evils we see in our world right now. We need Jesus to come with the same confidence and power he did in Gerasene. And even though this is my hope is that Jesus' healing power will enter our world today in the same magnificent way it did back then. I have to admit that my expectation of Jesus' healing power is that it will look a little different. I don't imagine Jesus confronting the injustices of today in a grand and eventful way like a herd of swine rushing down a hillside, immediately drowning. I wish the change from this broken and messy world to a world overflowing with love and bearing witness to beloved community would happen with such gusto. What I know, however, is that the work of dismantling injustice, disrupting the criminalization of those who are on the margins, and imagining a world that is inclusive, loving, and accepting of all is a long road. And the change often comes slowly and in its very small bursts. And this, my friends, is where my mind and heart are drawn to our first reading today from 1 Kings. Because Elijah, too, was looking for God and God's movement in the big things: the wind, the fire, the earthquake. But God does not appear for Elijah in that moment, in those things. God appears in the still, small voice. God appears in a way that Elijah had not expected. And God continues to appear in ways that we perhaps do not expect. In the still, small voice, the still, small voice that beckons us to turn towards building beloved community. It isn't always the big actions, it's the small ones too. Another call to my representatives, another Pride Month celebration, another small donation to an organization I care about, another kind word, another disruption of harmful speech, another whispered prayer, another rally or march, another email about gun control, another shared meal, another hug. The list goes on, and these small things, they matter. And when, like Elijah, I'm feeling so tired and hungry and distraught that I fear I cannot go on, I listen for the angel whispering into my ear, just as the angel whispered into Elijah's. Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you. And so I get up and I come here, where morning after morning, I come to this sacred place, and like the cake and water prepared for Elijah, bread and wine, most Sundays, not this Sunday as we do morning prayer, but most Sundays, bread and wine await me on that Eucharistic table. And I'm nourished, today nourished by singing together and praying together, other Sundays nourished by blessed bread and wine, by a meal that we share together. And perhaps the meal will not give me 40 days worth of energy like Elijah's meal gave him, but hopefully it will give me at least 7 days worth of energy until I'm able to come back here and be refilled once again in community with all of you by breaking bread together. And so, beloved community, let us keep listening to the small whispers of God. Keep showing up to find nourishment in singing and praying and breaking bread together, trusting that with Jesus' power and love, we'll be able to cast out the injustices that we see around us and transform our world to one of peace and love and community. Amen.